Welcome to this important event. I'm Carlos Teixeira, the director of the PhD program at the Institute of Design at Illinois Tech. I want to welcome the participants here in the room and those joining us online. The Institute of Design started the first PhD in design in the United States 32 years ago, in 1994. Since then, ID has pioneered design research and practice in design strategy, interaction design, systems design, and human-centered design, which are now common knowledge and practice worldwide. And we are very proud of that. In the PhD program, we developed the next frontiers of design practice. Today, Mariela Sotomayor will present the findings of her PhD research. As a tradition, PhD researchers are expected to share the original contribution they developed during their doctoral studies with society. This is a ritual that has been developed through centuries about PhD research. It's the sharing and making the knowledge public and accessible. It's a give back for the support they received in the journey of developing new knowledge. Special thanks to Wesley Ashton, thank you. Zach Pino, also thank you. And Isabel Barros, who is online, participating virtually in this event. These are the committee members that has worked with Mariela throughout the 4 years of her work. So thank for your mentorship to Mariela. I want to thank Credit Corp for their support to Mariela during her years of research at the Institute of Design. I was very honored to be in Lima, Peru last year, around this time of the year. And I was very welcome and great meetings, and I have opportunity to see firsthand the work and that Mariela and her team and all the her network is developing in Lima, Peru. So thanks for that opportunity. Thanks for being great hosts. I really enjoy it. Academic and industry collaborations are fundamental for attracting and nurturing the best talent in the world to work on the biggest challenge of our time. And they are not small and few. Our future depends on them and their work. Thanks, Mariela, for choosing the Institute of Design for your doctoral studies. We are very honored and privileged to have you here. Speaking about our challenges, Mariela will present her research findings today on multi-intelligence design on corporate conglomerates, empowering complex organizations with design as an epistemic infrastructure. Mariela's contributions are timely, happening at a pivotal moment when corporations are adopting new forms of intelligence. This is a big challenge, and we think and we believe that we are up to the task. And I think that what Mariela will be presenting today is just a demonstration of how we have been working this, not now, but for a while ago, at least in the last 4 years, just with Mariela. Mariela will talk for about 45 minutes, 1 hour, and we will have, at the end, 10 minutes for question and answers. So let's get started. Please welcome Mariela Sotomayor.
Thank you very much, Carlos, for such an introduction. So we're here today. Today is a special day. So good morning. Thank you for being here. Thank you to everyone who is here today, and also to those joining us from different parts of the world online. My name is Mariela Sotomayor. Carlos already made an amazing introduction. I'm going to add some key points on top of that. I am from Peru. I am at the end of the PhD Corporate Partnership Program here at ID, which means that I have pursued this doctorate while being fully immersed in my organization, working full-time, and leaving the questions that I was researching while using the corporation itself as both my research laboratory and my professional field of action. I'm an industrial designer by training, and over the past 2 decades, I have built my career as a design executive, leading design organizations, shaping strategy, and bringing design and customer experience at the table where business decisions are made. So this dual position, being a practitioner and as a researcher, is precisely what has shaped the nature of my work, of this work that I'm going to share with you today. It means that everything that you will see today was not theorized from outside, but actually has been built from within. So I want to begin by acknowledging that this is a deeply meaningful moment for me. I'm standing here after 4 years of doctoral research, but more honestly, after a long, much journey. One that began in design as a practice, inside organizations, and long before it became an academic curiosity. So this research emerged from years of being inside that rooms where business decisions are made, sitting with designers, engineers, strategists, business leaders, executives, and noticing again and again that something important was happening there and no one named it yet. So I keep seeing design doing something that went beyond its traditional role, something that was not only about delivering products or making interfaces, something that had to do how knowledge moves and how meaning gets made and shared across complex systems. And that observations became the seat of this research. I feel profoundly grateful to have my husband, Patricio, and 2 of my 3 daughters here. Our oldest, Emilia, I wasn't able to be here in person, but I know that she's with us, and that's more than enough for me. Patricio, you have been the most consistent presence in everything I do, and I get emotional, which is fine, right? So I wouldn't be able to hold all of this without you. And Emilia, Olivia, and Violeta, you grew up alongside this dissertation, girls. Wow, it was such a long journey, huh? So thank you for your constant smiles, your hugs, and for always bringing me back to the right perspective. This moment is not mine. This moment is something that we share as a family, as a group, as a community. I also want to acknowledge my family, my mother and my father, mi mamá y mi papá, for being a constant source of warmth, grounding, and unconditional support in everything I undertake. Also to my siblings, Pablo, Claudia, and Mauricio, you not only gave me a beautiful childhood, but always encouraged me to pursue my dreams. And also, I want to give a very special thanks to Chio for being my right hand at home and for somehow always knowing what we need to keep everything in place. To my friends back home, to my PhD fellows, somebody are here, somebody are online, thank you for always being a source of inspiration to me. And now I would like to switch just for a couple of minutes to Spanish because I want to address the design community in Latin America. Is it fine? Thank you. So, a la comunidad de diseño y experiencia de cliente en Latinoamérica, a los que están conectados de diferentes partes de la región, de los países, de donde estamos nosotros operando y trabajando, esto también es para ustedes. Llevamos años construyendo juntos un argumento, y ese argumento es que la experiencia del cliente y diseño no es un nice to have, no es el paso final de las decisiones, no es solamente una capa visible de lo que definimos como organizaciones. El diseño es una forma de razonar, la experiencia del cliente ayuda a generar conocimiento crítico que nos ayuda a transformar organizaciones y sociedades. Ese doctorado nace desde ese argumento, y hoy, al compartir este nuevo conocimiento de manera formal, lo que en realidad estoy haciendo es honrando el valor del trabajo que todos nosotros hacemos desde los diferentes países de Latinoamérica. Latinoamérica tiene un talento extraordinario en diseño, extraordinario en CX, en diferentes empresas dentro de los diferentes países latinos. Y es una voz enorme que debe tener mucho mayor espacio dentro del mundo académico, dentro del mundo de los negocios. Esto es lo que busco yo con este esfuerzo. No solamente avanzar la disciplina y evolucionarla, sino también ampliar su campo de acción y generar mayores espacios globales para poder hablar de diseño y experiencia de cliente desde un espacio donde el diseño en diferentes partes de Latinoamérica está emergiendo. Gracias por ser parte de este camino, gracias por compartirlo, por inspirarme, por cuestionarme. Y este espacio, esta defensa de doctorado, no la defiendo yo sola, la defiendo con toda la comunidad que está detrás de esto. Esto recoge mucho de ustedes y tiene muchísimo de ustedes también. Thank you. I'm gonna switch back to English. I would like to acknowledge Credit Corp, the organization where this research was conducted, and especially the leaders that participate who made this possible. This was not a routine research inside a corporation. This was a genuine act of institutional openness, a decision by leaders who believe that rigorous inquiry into how organizations think and decide is not peripheral to the business strategy. It is central to it. So Credit Corp has a clarity about something that many organizations are still struggling to articulate, that design and customer experience are not simply a differentiator. They are a vehicle through which the organization fulfills its most fundamental purpose, to positively impact the lives of people and communities it serves, across every country where it operates. That belief helps us operational commitment and actually is what really made this research possible. I also want to thank my advisor, Professor Carlos Teixeira. Thank you for these 4 years of intellectual rigor, honest challenge, and the kind of guidance that pushes you to think more precisely than you thought you could. I also want to acknowledge the members of my committee, Wesley, Zach, and Isabel, who is joining us today online from a different part of the world, which actually feels entirely appropriate given that the dissertation is about organizations that operate across distributed contexts. Your presence here matters. It matters a lot to me. Thank you for your contributions, your questions, and the conversations that sharpen this work. And with that, I'm going to take you what brings us here today. So what I'm presenting today is an observation drawn from inside of one of the most complex environments I know, a Latin America financial conglomerate operating under accelerated complexity, technological transformation, and the emergence of AI-augmented decision systems. This work is titled Multi-Intelligence Design in Corporate Conglomerates, and the model it produces, which is the main contribution of the research, is what I call MIDAS, the Multi-Intelligence Design Agency System, which we are going to discuss later. So let me take you to the argument. These presentations move through 6 connected steps. We will begin with the problem. Then we're going to examine the tension, why design is present everywhere, yet infrastructural nowhere. We will then move into the conceptual frame. We will talk about how design operates as agency, how that agency is epistemic, and why infrastructure is the right conceptual vehicle. This will lead us to the methodological approach. So I'm going to share with you how we have been collecting and analyzing the data. And from those findings, I'm going to introduce MIDAS, the model, as a system that structures how organizational reasoning can become coherent across distributed intelligence. And finally, I'm going to close with implications for organizations, for design leadership, for the design practice. So we'll talk about during the next 50 minutes probably, the kind of complexity in which design is operating right now. So let me start with something that might sound familiar for some of you. Imagine a marketing team deciding to remove 2 verification steps from a digital onboarding flow. It was a simple goal to improve conversion. So they roll out the solution and it works. The sign gaps go on. The numbers look good, everybody was celebrating, but then something happened that they cannot see. The fraud models, for example, which depends on those verification steps, start losing the signals they need. Accounts lockout grows, customer supports get overwhelmed, operations cannot keep up, and a few weeks later, a regulatory warning arrives. So one decision that was made rationally by a very capable team was cascading across the entire system without everybody knowing. And this is the key point. Each function was actually doing what were they supposed to do, but the organization wasn't seeing the situation as one. And that is a shift that I want to discuss today. And this is not a story about a bad decision. It is a story about a different kind of complexity that is happening within the business environment, one in which a single local decision becomes a multi-system event, where the consequences travel faster than the organization can interpret them. So we used to work within bounded problem spaces, contained within a team, a product, or a business unit. We now work in distributed systems across interconnected spaces. So in the past, and this is the right side of the slide, most critical decisions could be understood within a relatively bounded context. One team, one product, one business unit, one chain of causality. That work has not disappeared, but now it coexists with something fundamentally more complex. Today, what looks to a single decision is in reality a multi-system event. So a product decision touches a different unit like compliance. A technology decision reshapes, for example, operations. A regulatory shift changes the customer experience overnight. And this is not discussing about how AI is increasingly making this space more complex, as is bringing more signals and new forms of understanding and interpreting things within the corporation. So what we're talking about is not only more complexity, it's a different kind of complexity. This is in an organization that is operating inside deeply interconnected systems, where business logics, technology, governance, and customer expectations are all interacting continuously and not always in the same direction. So here the problem emerges. No? Organizations are not struggling because they lack capability. Actually, they have a lot of capabilities and new talent, and they're shaping new competencies. They are struggling because their reasoning architectures have not kept the pace with how decisions now propagate through that system, which is not only faster, but more complex. And this becomes even more challenging within conglomerates. This research is grounded in this context for a reason. It is developed from within a corporate conglomerate where I operate as the head of design and customer experience at the corporate level of a financial holding in Latin America, working across multiple subsidiaries operating in different countries. So from this position, I am not observing these dynamics from outside. I am working inside the system where they unfold, where decisions are constructed, negotiated, and executed. So what you see on this side of on this slide is the structure of that system, a corporate center connected to multiple subsidiaries, like, for example, banking, insurance, payments, technology, retail. However, each of these subsidiaries are operating under different conditions, each with its own regulatory constraints, technology infrastructures, strategic priorities, cultural logics, and of course, its own way of defining value. And that diversity is important, it matters. A banking subsidiary, for example, thinks in quarterly risk cycles. A technology unit thinks in weekly sprints. An insurance company thinks in 5 years regulatory horizon. So now, what happens when all of these are part of the same organization? Look at the center of the diagram. Actually, it is empty because there's no shared place where these organizations come together to think. And that is the point. That is exactly what I have been experiencing in practice. Decisions within each subsidiary not necessarily connect, not because people are not aligned, but because the system does not provide a way to construct shared understanding between them. So we tend to assume that large corporations operate like a unified brain, a central nervous system where signals travel from the edges of the organization to the center, get processed, and then generate coordinated action. So we assume that everyone inside the corporate boundary is experiencing and acting upon a shared reality. But that assumption is almost never true. So for this research, what is exactly a conglomerate? We have defined conglomerates as multi-business organizational system composed of legally and operationally distinct subsidiaries coordinated under a shared corporate parent. Unlike integrated firms organized around one single value chain, they operate simultaneously across diverse industries, technologies, regulatory environments, and the strategic logics. So in this scenario, making sense of a situation is no longer a centralized act. It becomes a distributed cognitive process. Different parts of the organizations are making sense of the same reality, but through different lenses, at different speeds, and with totally different logics. What this means in practice is that the conglomerate is not a single entity. It is a society of agents with incompatible temporalities. They do not share the same definition of what accounts as valid, actionable knowledge. The reality is that conglomerates operate more like a collection of isolated brains that not necessarily talk to each other. The challenge is how to construct a coherent strategic reasoning across boundaries when the units that are doing the reasoning do not share a common framework for understanding what is happening. So over the past decades, design becomes significantly more present inside organizations. So if you walk into a major corporate headquarters today, you will see design teams embedded in product development, you will see design systems, you will see research practices, and customer experience metrics integrated into how organizations operate. You will hear the language of design everywhere, like empathy, prototyping, service blueprint, customer experience. So design is now widely used across functions, and customer experience actually is a board-level priority. So in many ways, design is visible and it's more valued than ever. And yet, when you look closely at how critical decisions actually made, the ones that determines strategic direction, allocation of resources, the ones that decide what gets built and what gets cut, a different reality appears. So let me explain a bit more. Picture this. A design team spent 3 months mapping a customer journey map, mapping the customer journey. They identify exactly where the friction is, where the trust breaks. They understand the emotional and the practical reality of the user better than anyone in the organization. Then the Q3 planning happens. So the CFO, the operation leads, and the head of risk sit down, they look to the journey map, and they start to understand reality in their own heads under their different ways of seeing the world. So risk model, for example, they're going to think about protection, quarterly revenue targets, operational constraints, regulatory exposure. So the journey map gets acknowledged, but the decisions on how, on what gets done and what are made somewhere else and different logics. Because at that level of decisions that are being structured by frameworks that were never designed to include design reasoning. So you see, or we see, for example, financial models defining what is worth solving, risk frameworks establishing the boundaries before design enters the room, operational constraints determine what is feasible, and regulatory requirements set the ceiling. So design informs the process, but it does not define how decisions are framed. This produces a central paradox in this dissertation. We are saying that design is present everywhere and infrastructure nowhere. So design is visible in outputs, design is visible in language, but it's absent from the underlying architecture through which organizations actually think and decide. And in this kind of environment, the absence of design at that level is not just a missed opportunity, it is a source of fragmentation. Because without shared way of constructing situations, integrating knowledge, and coordinated reasoning across the system, the organization does not converge. It fragments faster and faster. So this absence of design at that level, operated at that level, produces a specific kind of failure, one that is easy to miss because on the surface, everything is okay, everything is moving positively. So at first glance, organization seems to be doing well. New products are launched, new experiences are designed, the NPS is okay and is actually increasing, teams are producing research, prototypes, journey maps, and service blueprints. So the issue is not that design is absent. And looking to the 4 quadrants here on the slides, we can see that organizations are accumulating design outputs, but they do not accumulate design reasoning. The logic behind the insights, why a situation was framed a certain way, or what knowledge is integrated, or what trade-offs were made visible, rarely travels across the organization. So each artifact, they exist, but the thinking behind them disappears. And when we think about processes, organization scales processes, like playbooks, toolkits, standardized workflows, but the playbook is just an instruction. So scaling the process is not the same as scaling integrative thinking. This ability to connect different forms of knowledge, such as customer insights, technology, risk, etc., in a single coherent picture, so that still or remains fragmented. So what happens in practice is that each team optimizes locally, each unit solves its own version of the same problem, but the organization as a whole struggles to develop a shared way of understanding what is happening. The business actually is producing more, but it does not understand more, at least not as a system. And this takes us to our claim that the problem is not the absence of innovation, the problem is the absence of coherence. So how did we get here? To understand why this is happening, it helps to trace how design has evolved inside organizations. Because the gap that we just described did not appear overnight, right? It's built into a trajectory. So what you see here is not a timeline. It is an expansion of the scope of action of design. So in era one, design shapes artifacts, right? Like products, interface objects, very focused on the specialized craft, operating within bounded problem spaces. The designer's job is to make that thing and to make it well. The design is design is the discipline of production. In era two, in the second era, design expands into processes. This is the rise of design thinking, organizations adopting methods, frameworks. Design starts shaping how teams work, how problems are approached, how ideas are generated, and is influencing how innovation is structured. Authors like Tim Brown, Roy Martin, between others, position design as a driver of organization transformation and not just a product quality or a product development capability. And this is a very, very meaningful shift. Design becomes more visible, more distributed, more present across functions that had never considered design relevant. But even as design scaled into organizations and processes, and I have lived all this transformation personally, it did not reach the level where the institution structure how they interpret situations, integrate knowledge, and make decisions. It scaled activities, not reasoning. It shapes how teams work, but not how organizations come to understand what is worth working on, or why. And when we go to the third era, this is where we're now, and this is where the research is situated. In the context of AI, data-rich environments, and accelerated organizational complexity, the question is no longer how design shapes artifacts or how it shapes processes. It's how design shapes how organizations reason and how they construct shared understanding of what is happening before any decision is made and before any product is built. And this is where distributed condition organizational theory and socio-technical systems become relevant, because what is at stake is not to produce better products or more efficient workshops. It is where organizations can think coherently as a system across a distributed human, institutional, and computational intelligence that now constitutes how they operate. So the scope of action of design is expanding from shaping artifacts to shaping how we work, to shaping how organization thinks. It is adding on top of the first one. And this is precisely the transition that this research is researching and proposing. And to understand what addressing this gap actually requires, I need to go back to a more fundamental thing. So before design is a profession, a method, or a mindset, design is a human capacity. The capacity for structuring action in the world under conditions of uncertainty. And this distinction matters, it's important, because it shifts where design begins. Design does not begin when someone opens a design tool. It does not begin when a business team starts working on a solution that they already have defined. It begins at the moment a situation is defined, at the moment in which somebody decides what the problem actually is. And that moment, the moment of framing, is where the most critical work of any organization happens. Because before any decision is made, someone has already determined what is happening, what matters, and what options are even considered possible. Those determinations are not neutral. They are not just objective readings of reality. They are constructed. So decisions do not start at the moment of choice. They start at the moment a situation is framed. So design operates at that level, not at the end of the organizational process where execution happens, but upstream, where reality is constructed for the organization itself. So if design operates at the moment where situations are defined, then we can talk about design in terms of agency. Agency in this research does not mean authority. It does not mean the designer gets to make the final call or that design owns a decision. It means something more specific and more fundamental. It is the capacity to shape how situations are constructed in the first place. And design can exercise this agency through 3 design operations. The first one is framing, which is related to designing what the situation is and what matters. Not discovering a problem that already exists there, but constructing it from within a set of choices that determine what is included, what is excluded, and what is considered relevant and valid. The second design operation for exercising agency in design is synthesis, integrating different forms of knowledge that would otherwise remain disconnected. And the third one is modeling. It's related to the ability to construct possible futures before action is taken. So making the option thinkable, creating the conditions for deliberation. You cannot choose between futures that you cannot see, and modeling makes them visible. So through these 3 design operations, design shapes what becomes relevant, what becomes visible, and what becomes possible to act on. This is why in this research I call design agency epistemic. It does not operate at the level of the execution, at the level of product execution, but at the level of how organizations come to know, interpret, and evaluate situation before they act. And that is a conceptual foundation of everything that is following. And here the argument deepens. So we have been discussing that decisions do not start at the moment of choice, right? They start earlier, at the moment the situation is framed. So every organization already has epistemic models. So, but they are just not designed intentionally to be integrated. Financial models, for example, frame what is worth to solve. Risk frameworks frame what is acceptable. And operational metrics frame what is feasible. So these are powerful lenses, all of them, but they are partial. And when they are the only lenses available, the organization can only see the kinds of problems those lenses were built to review. If the dominant lens is financial, then every problem becomes a financial problem, right? If the lenses or the dominant lens is risk, then every situation is interpreted through exposure and mitigation. So with this, we're saying that the organization does not see a single reality. It sees reality through the available frameworks. This is where design becomes critical, not as a creative practice, but as an epistemic one. So in this epistemic level, design introduces also different capacities to the organization. The first one is the ability to expand how situations are constructed. With that I mean to make visible what the existing lenses cannot see. The second one is the ability to integrate different forms of knowledge that would otherwise be evaluated in isolation. And the third one is the ability to create the conditions for alternative futures to be considered before decisions are made. So for conglomerates, the critical question is therefore not only what to decide, is whether the organization can think as one system or whether it is operating through fragmented interpretation of the same reality through incompatible lenses. When interpretation is fragmented, coherent action becomes impossible. That is where design epistemic role becomes essential. But if the capacity remains informal, dependent on individuals, specific teams, or isolated moments, it cannot scale. Which raises a couple of questions that also were part of this research. Like, how do you make this capacity really persistent? And how do you embed it into how the organization operates structurally? And with this argument, I have to move towards the notion of infrastructure. So if design needs to shape or can shape how organizations come to know and interpret reality, it cannot do that through workshops, it cannot do that through projects or individual expertise. It has to be embedded in how the organization operates. It has to become an infrastructure. When we hear the word infrastructure, we think about probably roads, data centers, cloud architectures, but in this research, infrastructure refers to something different. We're defining infrastructure as the underlying arrangements that shape how knowledge flows, how interpretations stabilize, and how decisions become actionable across the system. So thinking of this way, infrastructure is what allows an organization to behave coherently without constant coordination. It is what makes shared understanding possible at scale, without someone having to manually align everybody in every decision. And here's what matters most. Organizations already have epistemic infrastructures. They just did not build it intentionally or to work integrated. So enterprise data, for example, determine what signals get surfaced and which ones disappears. Governance structures define what counts as a legitimate decision and what gets rejected before it reaches the table. Decision forums determine whose interpretation carries authority, and operating models coordinate how work moves, and how reasoning gets lost also along the way. So these are not just operational mechanisms. They are the structures through which the organization thinks. So when design becomes infrastructural, it is no longer something that appears occasionally or episodically. It becomes embedded in the systems through which the organizations frame situations, integrates knowledge, and make decisions. And this is persistently at scale. So this is the threshold that this research proposed design must cross, not from artifacts to process, but from process to infrastructure. And now we have a certain level of urgency, right? Because environment is not waiting. So organizational reasoning is no longer happening in a single layer. It is distributed across human intelligence, algorithmic thinking, and institutional intelligence. Of course, next to all the AI outputs that we are able to generate. Each of these with its own logics, its own speed, and its own version of reality. These systems are not just do not just support decision, they shape what interpretations of reality gain credibility. And the structures, these kind of structures required to align those interpretations have not evolved at the same pace. So this is not a coordination problem, this is a reasoning problem. Let me move. Okay, so this brings us to the central question. So until now, we have established three things, so three critical facts. The first one is that organizations are fragmenting, not because they lack capabilities, but because the system through which they construct meaning are not aligned. The second thing established is that design already operates at the level where the meaning is made, through framing, synthesis, and modeling at the epistemic level, upstream every decision. And finally, we have established that this capacity in most organizations is informal, individual, and invisible. So the question is not whether if design can play this role. Actually, it does. It is playing this role already, but without structure and without scale. The question is what happens if you make this intentional. So this takes us to the main question of the research, which is how can design be repositioned as an epistemic infrastructure to enable coherent organizational reasoning in complex corporate conglomerates? Three ideas are the critical elements of this question. The first one is design. Framed here not as a profession, not as a method, not as a department, but as an agentic epistemic capacity. The ability to construct situations, integrate knowledge, and make futures thinkable before anyone makes a choice. The second dimension that is included in the question is epistemic infrastructure. Framed here not as a platform, not as a tool, not as a process, but as the underlying arrangements that determine what the organization can know, how interpretations stabilize, and what can actually be acted upon across the system, distributing reasoning at scale. And finally, coherent reason, framed here not as a uniformity, it's not like everybody has to do the same thing, but as a compatibility. A way to manage these diverse logics to interact without collapsing into fragmentation. So this question shapes the gap, and design has the capacity to close it, like no other organizational function is positioned to do so, because no other function was built to operate at the level where meaning is constructed. So to address this question, this research is grounded in practice as a primary site of inquiry. So the research is conducted from within this large corporate conglomerate, where I am actively participating in the design and evolution of decision-making processes across subsidiaries, not as an external observer, but as an embedded practitioner with direct access to moments that otherwise would be invisible. The methodological architecture considers 4 approaches, working together as a single inquiry system. Research through design. Here, design is not only the object of the study, but is the instrument of inquiry. Participatory action research, which is research in action embedded in ongoing organizational activities with real operational stakes. The behaviors observed here, like hesitations or adaptations or accelerations, reflect how the organization actually operates. And the third approach is perhaps the most personal, which is the ethnography inquiry. I did not, in this space, I did not separate myself from what I was observing. So my own decisions, tensions, and moments of uncertainty, like times I was wrong or the times I had to change my interpretations, are all them become part of the data. So not because of, I haven't done this because of objectivity is impossible, but because in this kind of research, the practitioner's position is not a source of bias to be eliminated. It's a source of access to some information that an external researcher could not have. So I was within the system and examined what it meant to me also to be there. And underneath all the 3 of these approaches is a sustained engagement with literature. So theory gives you the language of the things that you're observing. So this was very important. So this embedded position gave me access to something very unique, and to make the most of it, we structure all the research process into what we call episodes. And in this research, we have defined an episode as a bounded analytical unit constructed around a live organization situation. One real operation with real stakes, with real constraints, with real actors making real decisions under a reality. It is for us, it is an organizational reasoning that we have been observed as it's been produced. So episodes for us are the empirical foundation from which the entire argument is built. Also, as part of each episode, we constructed a set of analytical artifacts in real time, not only to document what happened, but to make visible the reasoning that was happening as it unfolded. So I'm not going to get deep into each of one today. They are documented in full in the dissertation that hopefully will be available for everybody soon. But the main point is this. These artifacts created a traceable path from what was observed in practice to findings, to patterns that can travel beyond a specific context where they emerged. So this allowed us to move from situated action to transferable insights. So let's go to the episodes. Within the conglomerate, we were able to choose 3 different spaces of observation. 3 moments where the phenomenon we were studying becomes visible in action. Episode 1 is Dania. This episode was focused on AI augmented UX writing in a regulated environment. The second one is synthetic users, focuses on AI-generated user representations and challenge the epistemic legitimacy. And the third episode is producer, focuses on platform-mediated coordination action functions. Here, we were trying to understand what happens when design reasoning gets embedded in workflows. So let's see them in more detail. Yeah, but before that, so every episode involved an organization trying to construct meaning and make decisions under conditions of uncertainty. So to make the comparison possible across 3 very different organizational contexts, I structured the analysis around 4 dimensions. The first one is epistemic infrastructure. So it's to observe what structures already exist that shape the knowledge flows, how interpretation is stabilized, and how decisions become actionable. The second one is design agency, how design intervenes in this terrain. Where does design agency concentrate? Where it's suppressed? Is it structural? Or entirely dependent on the specific individuals? The third one is multi-intelligence interaction, how different moments or different forms of intelligence interact in the construction of decisions, human, algorithmic, and institutional. And the fourth one is organizational coherence. What is the result? Does the reasoning align across actors and functions, or does it stay fragmented and local? So here we were asking, can the insight generated in one context travel to another and to a different reality? So these 4 dimensions move from structure to agency to interaction and to outcome. And that consistency is what makes the comparison between episodes possible. And now we move to the episodes. The first episode is Dania. Like I said, Dania focuses on UX writing content, which is content creation for digital experiences, the design competency that was observed in action. So this episode takes place within a digital product team operating at scale inside a highly regulated financial company. The episode centers on a senior UX writer, someone with deep expertise in narrative, tone, and product semantics, who independently developed a personalized AI agent to support his work. So this initiative was not an organizational mandate that had a strategy behind that. It emerged from practice in response or to the real tension that many design teams were starting to face. On one side, business required increasing speed, consistency, and scalability in content production. And on the other side, design was responsible for ensuring clarity, coherence, and compliance across increasingly complex product flows. So those 2 forces were starting to diverge. And the question was not if we have the ability to write faster using AI. The question was whether it was possible to scale content generation without losing control over meaning. So initially, the UX Writer AI agent worked. It generated multiple versions of copy instantly, in adapted tone, followed structural patterns, transformed research inputs into story frames, and early product flows in a fraction of time. It was amazing. And actually, designers were saying that it was like having a very fast junior partner. But the system became integrated, as a system became integrated in real product flows, something started to shift. Designers were no longer primarily writing. They were evaluating, selecting between outputs. And this was very interesting because here we start to see that a deeper shift in design agency. Design is no longer in this space operating as an author of content. It was operating as the arbiter of meaning. So the designer is no longer asking, what should I write? No? But which of these outputs is appropriate in this situation and why? So the question changed a lot, and the role also changed a lot. And this is where the tension becomes empirically visible. So many times a designer needs to intervene to resequence the narrative that the UX AI agent, UX writer AI agent was sending. This happened repeatedly through the episode. So the outputs were coherence, but most of the time they lacked awareness of timing, intention, and institutional responsibility within the flow. So what was missing was not structure, it was judgment. So let's read this through the lenses of the 4 analytical dimensions. When it comes to epistemic infrastructure, what we see is that the AI agent that operated on semantic frameworks, tone guidelines, value propositions, structural patterns. But for example, legal and compliance constraints were not interoperable with the agent. They were not embedded. So they had to be manually interpreted by the designer at each interaction. So the infrastructure enabled the production and the speed, but it did not enable institutional legitimacy. And the governance hooks, like, for example, approval gates or condition of truth escalation threshold, were entirely absent from the AI layer. They were enforced only through the human intervention. When it comes to design agency in this episode was concentrated in one person. The designer retained the final judgment at every step. It was not distributed, it wasn't codified, it wasn't transferable. When the designer was present, governance existed. When the designer was absent, so was the governance. So this was what we call, in the research, we call this agency concentration, and it is the most fragile configuration possible at organizational scale because it's dependent on the individual. When it comes to multi-intelligence interaction, human and AI form genuinely complementary roles. AI provided generative capacity and consistency, and the designer provided judgments, validations, and institutional alignment. But trust in AI was bounded. It extended to ideation and task acceleration, but not to decision-making or accountability. There was no mechanisms for the organization's regulatory logic or risk frameworks to participate in the AI's reasoning directly. Hybrid cognition was emerging, but without embedded governance, it remains incomplete. And when it comes to organizational coherence, the designer-agent workflow worked. It was internally consistent and could be replicated within the same context. But it was not portable across subsidiaries. So different products, different regulatory environments, and different tone standards, all of them required manual readaptation. And so each deployment of this capability had to be rebuilt from scratch if you want to take it to a different subsidiary. So the absence of shared epistemic infrastructure meant that what worked brilliantly and amazing in one context could not become an organizational capability. So what does Dania demonstrate? That AI does not eliminate design agency. It changes, it reconfigures it. The designers become more strategically critical points in the entire system. The only place where speed meets accountability, where generative capacity meets institutional responsibility, that's a designer. But that role has no structural support. It depends entirely on individual expertise, individual judgment, and individual presence. And that's the challenge, because you cannot build organizational coherence on individual heroism. So without infrastructure, speed scales inconsistently, not intelligence. Inconsistency, not intelligence. Here you can see some of the artifacts that were generated through the episode. This includes not only AI-generated outputs, but also analytical artifacts that support the study. Let's move to the second episode. This is a synthetic user episode. And I want to start here with a question that drove this entire initiative, because it's one of the most provocative questions a design team can ask inside large financial conglomerate. And is, what if designers could talk to users, without being users physically present? The intention here of the design team at this company wasn't to replace research or create data from scratch, but to take everything the organization already knows about the users, like interview transcripts, behavioral patterns, segment definitions, accumulated qualitative insights, and ask, can we make the user can we make that user knowledge responsive? Can we build something that reasons from what we know rather than just storing it? So this work was developed inside a banking organization operating within the compliance and security frameworks of the conglomerate, using Copilot Studio, which was the approved tool within the organization's data and AI governance boundaries. It was a real organization environment with real rules about what data can be shared, how it can be structured, and what systems can access. So the team built what they called a synthetic user, an AI agent designed to represent a specific user segment of the bank, constructed from real interview transcripts, behavioral patterns, and contextual data. something you could actually talk to. So at first, the assumption was that the challenge was technical, how to build the model, for example, how to prompt it, how to generate reliable responses. However, during the session, the team asked the synthetic user how it spends its free time, and importantly, with what data it was going to use to define those preferences. And it was interesting because the system produced a very coherent answer, very contextually grounded answer, describing behaviors, motivations, and contextual factors, just as a real user might do. And then it said, there is no sufficient evidence in a knowledge base, but this can be inferred. So the system was not just answering, it was distinguishing between what it knew and what it was constructed from patterns. It was surfacing its own epistemic limits in real time. And this is where this shift becomes visible, because design is not only responsible for generating insights, it becomes responsible for structuring the knowledge that the system can reason with, and for understanding the boundaries between evidence and inference. And that's a fundamental shift in how knowledge is produced inside an organization. The system is no longer just retrieving information, it is participating in reasoning, while making its source uncertainty visible. Now let's see this episode through the 4 analytical dimensions. When it comes to epistemic infrastructure, the AI model was not a limited factor. The infrastructure of knowledge was. The team has to standardize formats, structure transcripts, define how information was indexed, and make fragmented organizational data legible to a machine. That was a huge challenge. But the data was itself bounded, constrained by the organization's security and data sharing policies. So what this episode makes visible is that the real epistemic infrastructure is not the AI system. It is a knowledge architecture that determines what the AI can reason from. And in most organizations, that architecture is fragmented, inconsistent, and organizationally siloed by design, actually. When it comes to design agency, the designer's role in the episode is unrecognizable from what traditional user research demands. So designers are here no longer doing or conducting interviews or synthesizing observations. They are structuring knowledge. They are defining behavioral rules, calibrating outputs, and evaluating whether the system responds hold up scrutiny. So they are building systems that produce interpretations, and then governing the quality and legitimacy of those interpretations. So the designer becomes the orchestrator of reasoning systems. That's very interesting. And this is fundamentally a different mode of design agency, one that most organizations have not formal role, title, or career path for. When it comes to multi-intelligence interaction, here's what the most structurally significant finding in this episode emerges. Within the design team, the synthetic user system produced genuinely useful outputs. Designers could simulate interviews, generate behavioral patterns, test hypotheses in early stages. So the knowledge production was high, knowledge interrogation was high, designers repeatedly questioned, calibrated, and refined outputs. But the path stopped. Not because someone rejected the insights, but because there was no organizational pathway to take what the system is producing and move it into formal decision process. So the synthetic user remains confined to the design team, working space with no mechanisms for escalation or broader organizational action. So this research identified this as epistemic asymmetry. What does it mean? It means the organization's capacity to generate knowledge had dramatically outpaced the capacity to legitimate and act on it. Not because the knowledge was wrong, but because the organization had never designed the structures through which these new forms of intelligence could be received. Also, we encountered the organizational reality that makes this worse at the conglomerate scale, because fragmented data across units, inconsistent knowledge structures across subsidiaries, security and governance constraints, data sharing policies, all of this, which is institutional intelligence, was limiting also what can be shared and how can be shared. So even a system that worked within one team could not easily be extended because the knowledge architecture it depended or did not exist at the organizational scale. So design was ready, but the organization wasn't. And this is the gap between what design can now generate and what organizations are structurally capable of receiving. This is not a technology problem, it is an infrastructural problem. Here also I'm sharing a couple of artifacts developed for analyzing that episode. And then we move to the last one, which is producer. This episode did not begin as a research initiative. It began as a practical problem that design teams across a large digital product environment facing every day. How do you increase speed, consistency, and quality in early stages of the design work, but without sacrificing the judgment that makes design valuable? So a senior designer, digital product designer, began experimenting with generative AI inside a design tool environment. The initial expectation was to generate wireframes faster. And yes, it happened. AI was producing outputs, but those outputs not always were consistent. Sometimes they were structurally incorrect, frequently disconnected from the design system that they have, the product's behavioral principles, and the tone that had been carefully built over the past years. So the tool was fast, very fast, and it was also wrong in ways that were subtle enough to be dangerous because it looked right. So instead of abandoning the tool, the designer did something very interesting that changed the nature of the entire episode. She stopped designing screens and started designing how the AI should think. This is a shift. So design moved from designer as a decision maker to designer as a decision system designer. So she built what became the core of Producer, which is a mother template that structures every interaction, a runbook that sequences how decisions should be made, embedded design heuristics and UX laws, Q&A, a quality assurance checklist that AI had to execute itself, a system prompting, rules that define context, constraints, and expected reasoning. So this is not a set of instructions for AI to follow, but it's more like a cognitive environment for AI to operate inside. And yet, with all of that, the AI still failed. It applied heuristic incorrectly. It violated design system constraints. It constantly struggled with tacit judgment, which is the thing that designers know, but they are not able to articulate why they know what they know. So the designer kept intervening, refining rules, restructuring prompts, embedding constraints. The process became iterative, dialogical, and deeply reflective, less like using a tool and more like training a reasoning partner. Producer stopped being a tool that generated these designs. It became a system that structured how design decisions are made. It could generate flows. It can also explain its reasoning, why it's making the decision that it's making, and evaluate its own outputs. So the most important thing is that it created a shared cognitive infrastructure. So different designers could now start from the same epistemic foundation, operate with the same principles, and produce outputs that were more consistent across the system. And this is a real shift because we're not talking about automation of design. We're talking about the distribution of designerly agency. Design moved from individual capability to a distributed infrastructure. So now let me read this through the four analytical dimensions. When it comes to epistemic infrastructure, Producer is the most mature infrastructural configuration of the three episodes. Design knowledge was externalized into a shared structure that AI could operate on. So design reasoning was proceduralized through design missions, prompts, and evaluation criteria, explicitly reducing reliance on tacit expertise. So the infrastructure embedded UX and behavioral rules, enabling compliant outputs without requiring constant human correction. This is a significant achievement. For the first time across the three episodes, epistemic infrastructure is not just present, it is functional. But notice that what it still did not do. governance remained partially external. So institutional intelligence, like legal constraints, regulatory requirements, risks, thresholds, operated throughout evaluation frameworks maintained by humans, not through mechanisms embedded in the AI itself. So the system structured how design decisions were made, but it did not yet structure how those decisions were validated, escalated, or connected to a broader organizational logic. When it comes to design agency, in producer, agency is distributed, not concentrated in a single designer, as in Dania, for example, not operating through legitimacy, negotiation, as a synthetic user, for example. Here, agency is shared across evaluators, criteria, templates, and AI interaction with designers, retaining final accountability exercised through governance rather than authorship. So this is analytically important. The designer does not disappear, the contrary, but the role transforms from making the design to maintaining the conditions under which good design can be made, repeatedly by different people across different contexts. When it comes to multi-intelligence interaction, producers demonstrate what structurally hybrid cognition looks like when it actually works. Design decisions emerge through interaction between AI generation, human judgment, and institutional criteria with a clear role differentiator. AI provides generative infrastructure at speed, humans provided contextual judgment and legitimacy, and hybrid cognition accelerates early-stage decision work significantly, while preserving human responsibility for final decisions. When it comes to organizational coherence, here's where producer reviews its ceiling, and where the most structurally important finding of the episode also emerged. Within the team, shared design language enables coherence across roles and consistent judgment. But through the knowledge base remain product-specific. So different designers could use the same method, but content embedded in it was built for one product or context or a set of constraints. So the moment you try to transfer it across subsidiaries, different regulatory environments again, different technology infrastructures, you will do partially rebuild the system. So epistemic coherence was achieved locally. It was not portable across the conglomerate yet. I know that's coming. So what does producer ultimately show? It shows what becomes possible when design reasoning is made explicit, structured, and embedded in a shared system. That is not a small thing. Actually, most organizations never achieve it. I've been looking around. But it also shows the ceiling of what individual initiative can achieve without organizational infrastructure to support it. Here are some artifacts that we produce, and also I have a demo of producing episode. And well, as you watch it, I know it's hard to see everything, but what you're seeing is not just a tool generating outputs, it is a system where design logic have been embedded into how content is produced. So the templates, the structure, the sequence, they are not random. They are reflect decisions that were made by designers and then encoded into the system. So instead of designing each output from scratch, the designer is shaping how outputs is generated. And this is an important shift. No? Design is no longer creating artifacts. Design is structuring the system that producing the artifacts. So let me go really quick in how we synthesize the 3 episodes. I identify the patterns that emerge across them. The first one is about design agency. So designerly agency compensates for what the structure cannot do. In every episode, design judgment steps in to fill the gap that the system left open. The second pattern is infrastructure determines the quality of hybrid cognition, not the AI. So across all the 3 episodes, the AI system was not differentiating factor. What differentiated the episodes from each other was the organizational infrastructure surrounding the AI. The third pattern is about AI that accelerates production, and governance does not keep the pace. So in every episode, AI-enabled generation and exploration move faster than the institutional mechanisms designed to validate, legitimate, and act on what was produced by designers. And the last pattern is coherence. Coherence remains local, not portable. So in every episode, show that methods, tools, and workflows can be transferred. Templates can be replicated. Prompts get shared, and process travels. But the validation criteria that make those methods meaningful, the standards of evidence, the decision thresholds, and the shared understanding of what counts as valid remains strictly local. Taken together, these four patterns describe a condition that research names like distributed capability without systemic coherence. Okay, so the capability exists, the system to sustain does not. Before going that, something important to mention. Let me see. Here. Yeah? Yeah. So in this scenario, design is actually operating as a multi-intelligence system across all three episodes in the three organizations. Designers are orchestrating AI, governing hybrid conditions, and maintaining institutional legitimacy under conditions of accelerations and uncertainty. And that's important. That's important to position design in that space. So what the episode reviews is the absence of something that governs how design intelligence, human and machine, travels, recombines, and remains accountable across multiple spaces and multi-business organizations. So what we're talking about is that what is missing is a system that do four things. Stabilize design agency, so it does not disappear when the individual leaves. Structures hybrid conditions, so human and AI reasoning integrate rather than running parallel at incompatible speeds. Aligns temporal dynamics, so fast-moving AI inference and slow-moving institutional governance can coexist without one overriding the other. And finally, makes coherence portable, not just within a team, but across the system. So organizations are not limited by what they can do. They actually can do more than ever. They are limited by how they make sense of what they're doing. So the question is, what would it take to build infrastructure that closes that gap? And this is what the framework MIDAS is proposing. So MIDAS. This is a model that positions design not as a function that produces outputs, but as an infrastructure for organizational reasoning. The connective architecture through which human judgment, machine intelligence, and institutional logic can interoperate. MIDAS brings three main characteristics. First, agency is no longer located on the individual designer. It is located in the system's capacity to coordinate reasoning across boundaries. Second, coherence is not assumed. It is treated as a systemic achievement. It is fragile, is provisional, and is actively maintained. It does not emerge from collaboration. It emerges by design. And third, MIDAS does not propose adding new capabilities to the organization. It proposes a structural logic for connecting what already exists and make it function as a system rather than as fragments, and also allows to emerging capabilities to be added on the system. Okay, so if MIDAS is the structural response, then what is actually made of? So the model is built on three interconnected infrastructures. The first one is the epistemic infrastructure, which is related to how the organization makes sense. This governs how meaning is produced, negotiated, and shared, how situations are interpreted, how problems are framed, and crucially, what counts as valid knowledge for decision-making. Then the second infrastructure is the operative infrastructure, which is related to how the organization acts. This defines how framing, synthesis, and modeling are enacted, repeated, and scaled beyond individual teams. It is composed of distributed capabilities, tools and standards, hybrid condition workflows, and experimentation pipelines. This is where the epistemic logic becomes practice, when the conditions for good decisions get embedded into the system people use every day. And finally, the strategic infrastructure, how the organization decides over time. This is the least visible and the most consequential. So it covers how direction, decision-making, and organizational coherence are stabilized across a conglomerate. It defines how value is understood, how trade-offs are structured, and how decisions made in one subsidiary connect to decisions made in another. It has 4 components. I think that one of the most important and the one that was absent in every episode is the organizational decision memory, the system through which prior decisions, the assumptions behind them, and their outcomes are preserved and made available for future reasoning. So without a strategic infrastructure, the organization can act, but it does not learn. So it doesn't move, it doesn't evolve. So these are the infrastructures. And then once we understand the infrastructure, the next question is, how do they work together? Because MIDAS is not just a structure, it is a system that evolves, reasoning over time. And it does through 3 loops. Each loop connects 2 infrastructures, and each one evolves a different challenge, and they only function as a system, because the failure in any one will break others as well. So the first loop is a cognitive loop. It's how meaning becomes action. So this loop connects the epistemic infrastructure with the operative infrastructure. It governs the ongoing alignment and misalignment between how situations are understood and how they are acted upon. In complex organizations, this breaks constantly, no? Not because people we don't have talent or people are incompetent, but because different teams are solving different interpretations of the same situation. The next loop is the agency amplification. It's related to how action becomes direction. So this loop connects the operative infrastructure with the strategic infrastructure. It governs how local acts of design agency, framing, synthesis, and modeling escape the individual and become structures that can actually travel. This is where design stops being personal and becomes systemic. Yeah, and then we here make a clarification and a precision that this agency amplification loop requires something, that design agency is amplified when local acts of framing, synthesis, and modeling are not confined to isolated interventions, but are translated into structures that can inform decision-making beyond the original context. Like we were saying, templates can travel, prompts travel, but as producer episodes showed, the knowledge base embedded in those templates remained product-specific. So the method was replicable, but the reasoning behind that was not portable. And the third loop is synergetic feedback. It is related to how direction reconfigures meaning. So this loop connects a strategic infrastructure with the epistemic infrastructure. It governs how the organization learns, not just from individual decisions, but across the system and over time. This loop was the most completely absent across all the 3 episodes. So those insights were analytically rigorous, internally consistent, and genuinely useful. And then they stayed inside the design team. They were not validated against formal decision criteria, so they were stored and not travel or circulate within the organization. So these loops do not self-regulate. They are governed. So who governs all this? Sorry. Okay, because we need coordination, so we need to have the orchestration system. So the orchestration system is in charge of defining how the situation should be addressed and how the loops should be activated. It does it through 4 specific mechanisms. So the first one is, what is happening? Okay, scope of reasoning, temporal alignment, conditions for interventions, and AI participation conditions. So what we're trying to do is to actually orchestrate organizational reasoning and positioning within the boundaries that defines accountability and the conditions that each of these loops should be activated and participate. So this is the orchestration core, and this is what MIDAS system, what makes MIDAS a system and not a structure, and creates dynamics. So coherence in MIDAS is not achieved by eliminating those differences between subsidiaries and the cultural logics and different maturity and different realities that every subsidiary is living. It is achieved by structuring how they interact. So multiple forms of intelligence can reason together without requiring any of them to become the same. So we're not talking about a standardized way of working or standardize a way of thinking. We're talking about make those thinking or that reasoning compatible and able to circulate across the whole system. So what happens when MIDAS is adopted within an organization? So what would be actually different? Oh, sorry. So the first thing that we think when we start to test MIDAS and think on long term when MIDAS is adopted in the organization is that the quality of reasoning that produces the outcomes is going to change. No? When organization reasons well, we can say that framing is shared, synthesis is structured, and modeling is part of how decisions are made. And these three things make the product and experience emerge in a better place. So the direct impact of MIDAS is on the quality of outputs that an organization is able to make. Is creating the conditions for framing, synthesis, and modeling interact in contexts in which they have to integrate different forms of intelligence and produce the output by using these new capabilities. And the question changes also. So we move from an organization asking itself, what should we build, to what is the situation we actually acting on? Or do we understand it the same way across the system? So the question changes when you start to use MIDAS for product development and solutions. And here's the provocation I want to leave with. So right now, most conglomerates are competing on execution at speed with AI capabilities, and both are like real advantage, but they are also symmetrical. Every organization has access to the same models, the same infrastructures, and the same, almost the same talent pool. The asymmetric advantage, the one that's genuinely difficult to replicate, is the capacity to reason coherently at scale. So the capacity to really to share the same reality across complex systems. Because that capacity is not bought, it is not installed, it is not just activated by adopting new AI or system, it is built. So organizations that build these kind of systems will produce something their competitors cannot easily match, which we call the corporate strategy vision, the parenting advantage. The structural capacity of a conglomerate to generate across all of its subsidiaries products and experiences that are more coherent, more resilient, and more responsive to the complexity of human needs that any single business competitor could produce alone. And then, so now that the argument is built and the model is defined, the empirical evidence now is on the table. What remains is the question that every research contribution must eventually answer. Okay, so what? What is the implication? What is coming? So this is practically, and some level of speculative as well, is what are the implications for different dimensions? So when it comes to organizations, the organizations do not typically think of design as a governance problem. They think it as a delivery problem. So this is the first thing this research asks them to consider, or to reconsider. Most organizations govern decisions, they review outcomes, audit processes, measure performance, and that all of that is necessary. But this research points into something different. It points or sits design upstream of all of that, something that most organizational governance systems never reach. the conditions under which decisions become possible in the first place, how a situation is framed, how we make things or make sense of different forms of knowledge that are within the space of operation, and how we can act upon different possibilities of the future. For design leaders are not only now accountable for what gets delivered, they are accountable for the quality of reasoning environments that determine what gets built and who serves it. So design leadership is undergoing a fundamental shift, and most organizations have not yet named it, structured or built it. So for most of the history of the profession, design leadership meant to direct outputs, managing teams, ensuring delivery quality, and advocating for users inside corporations. The role was valuable, and it still is. No? Design leaders are going to still do that. But it's also something that we need to expand the scope, because the most critical design decisions are not made inside the design team. They are made upstream, in the moment a situation is framed and in how evidence is structured for a strategic discussion, in which trade-offs are made visible before anyone commits to any action. So those are design decisions, and in most organizations, no one is accountable for their quality. For design practitioners, for designers in practice, so you're already doing this work. No? The question is whether the organization will build infrastructure to sustain it. So speaking directly to the practitioners in the room and the ones that are joining online, product designers, UX researchers, conversational designers, UI practitioners, your role is expanding the territory that most organizations have not yet recognized, named, or support. But here's what actually happened. As AI system becomes more capable, the parts of design works were always about execution are compressing. So wireframes, copy variations, flow generation, visual alternative, the time those tasks require shrinking dramatically. And that compression is not a threat to design. Actually, it's a clarification. It is making visible what design was always most valuable for, and what no AI system can do. The judgment about whether this is the right problem to solve, the synthesis of knowledge the organization would otherwise never connect, and the governance meaning in environments where AI generates faster than institution can evaluate. Those are not soft skills. They are not add-ons on the UX role. They are the epistemic operations at the core of this research, and they require a different set of competencies that the one most designers were trained for. So the competencies they need to emerge are, and I want to name some of them, is system literacy, understanding how a decision travels. The other one is epistemic fluency, is the ability to work with multiple forms of knowledge simultaneously. And the other one is governance instinct, which is the ability to recognize when an AI output requires validation, when a framing is drifting in a direction that will produce incoherence, and when the organization's reasoning needs to be recomposed before a decision is made. So these competencies are not new to design. They have always been latent in the discipline, in how designers frame problems, synthesize knowledge, and construct futures before action is taken. What is new is that organizations now need them to operate at scale, across systems, in environments where AI is a participant in every consequential decision. So designers that actually develop these competencies will not be the ones that the AI replace. They will be the ones that the organization cannot reason without. And finally, for design as a discipline, so design is not only about what organizations create. It's not about the product or the artifact. It's about how they determine what is worth creating and who those decisions serve. So this distinction is important because it's critical claim in this research. Because when design operates as epistemic infrastructure, its effects do not stop the organizational boundaries. They propagate outward into the quality of relationship organizations build with their users, into the services people can access, into who gets included and who gets left out. So in sectors like financial services, healthcare, and digital platforms, these decisions that design infrastructures shapes are not neutral. They determine they determine how needs are understood and whose needs are visible. So how services are delivered and who can afford them, how trust is built or systemically eroded, how opportunity is distributed across communities, and how the system was designed to serve in the first place. So they are not abstract concerns, there are lived consequences of organizational reasoning that either coheres or fragments. So yeah, this is the agenda this research opens, the agenda for practitioners who are already doing this work without name for it, for educators who are preparing designers for a role that does not exist yet as a formal category, and for researchers who are beginning to examine how design operates at the level of organizational cognition, not just artifact production, and for a discipline that has always been or always had the ambition to shape how the world is constructed, and now, finally, being asked to do exactly that. So with that, thank you very much. It's been a long presentation, so thank you for your attention and your patience.
Thank you. Thanks, Mariela, for a complete and comprehensive presentation. We are going to have a few minutes for question and answers. We are over time, but worth it. And I will take a few questions for about 5 minutes max, and then we're going to break to the internal committee meeting inside the group. So anyone wants to jump with questions? So Mariela, comments also are welcome.
Mariela, great presentation, great design visualizations. Appreciated the work that you've done. So when we did some work with large conglomerates in the past, one of the big issues we had with any form of design evangelism within the organization was that the senior leadership were not designers or did not have a design mindset, right? So what happens when you, even though most designers in the system understand what design can contribute, the senior leadership never understood what it was able to contribute. Have you studied that within your work, and do you have any insights on how that can be rectified or addressed?
Yeah, so yeah, thank you for the question. I think that's one of the main challenges inside conglomerates. It's how to position design as important as any other function within the heads of top leaders in the corporation. So I think that from my practice, from doing design at the strategic level within a financial company, and then now at the conglomerate level, I see that this is not only this is a design problem, and it's from the design perspective, it's a responsibility for designers to create that mindset and to educate top leaders about the value of design and the importance of design as a practice, as a core capability for businesses. And at the same time, I think it's a cultural change challenge as well. So what happens in the company that I've been working is that all the introduction of Beyond Design is more how to be user-centric and how to really think about the user on everything that we are doing, which is the purpose of design. It's been part of a change management strategy within the organization. And this allows design to enter in new spaces because design is equipped with that kind of capabilities to help organizations think about the user with different methods and in a different way. So, of course, it's been part of my study, but I think it's more part of my daily life within corporations, not to all the time try to put design on the table and talk about also the impact in financial terms. So if we think about the user and if we make decisions towards really create engagement and build a long-term relationship with our users, then our NPS is going to increase. our loyalty is going to increase. They're going to come back. They're going to recommend us. And we can see that in the numbers, in the P&L. So I think it's also about design, talking more in business language as well.
So,
Hi, Mariela. We are so proud of you that finally your research embedded design at organizational level. It's happened during your research. So proud from design management background to strategic design. Your research is a blueprint of embedded design into the system. So my question, while you're doing your research in the company, like how you articulate all of the PhD research and you as a member at the corporate, how you combine those?
So yeah, articulated as a way of creating new knowledge and to really build this competitive advantage within the corporation. I haven't seen, and I've been looking out, a corporate conglomerate that is positioned in design at that level, and it's really building the forefront of the future of design. Haven't seen this happening, and I think that for my organization, this is something that they want to build because they really think that this is going to create this competitive advantage for the next 5 years. So now in my corporation, design is part of the 2030 agenda of the corporate conglomerate, and the PhD is a way to bring new knowledge to that conversation at the strategic level, because this is not happening. Of course, it's happening at the operative level, and the team members are really executing new ways of doing design in a context also that is absolutely new for designers to operate within. But these discussions are also at the strategic level, defining the strategy for the conglomerate for the next year. So the PhD is bringing this new perspective and legitimacy also to the design practice, and created a lot of value on that.
one more last question, Nick.
I found it interesting. First, congratulations. I spoke to you 2 years ago now. It's amazing to see that you're now complete with your dissertation. Congratulations. Within the beginning of your presentation and representations of conglomerates with multiple businesses, and then with the different modes of operating, risk, regulation, etc. I found it interesting that customers, not just users, but customers of these different units, weren't, the information wasn't really represented or brought up to, I guess, the entire operational level and how those different purposes interacted. How did you find that information and data to be shared currently? Like, I think we're starting to see a model for that strategy to be reflected in MIDAS, but how do you find that companies pull that information together now?
Yeah, that's a super interesting question, and it's part of the cultural transformation that the conglomerate is undergoing right now. So conglomerates are built for the subsidiaries to compete. That's historically, that's the main objective of a conglomerate. And now we're shifting that mindset from competition to collaboration. And the conglomerate needs to build not only the mindset for the subsidiaries to start to collaborate between them, but also the infrastructure, the technology infrastructure, to be able to share data and to change all the policy regulations that we have when it comes to share data between subsidiaries. So alongside my studies on MIDAS, the corporation is also leading, they are at the forefront of technology revolution, in a sense of sharing data at the holding level. And this is something that it doesn't exist, or it is being created right now. with the intention of start collaborating more and to understand our user from an end-to-end perspective. Because what is interesting in a conglomerate is that one user, for example, myself, I'm the user of at least 6 companies of that holding. And when I interact with one company, they only know me on the interaction that I have with that company. But actually, I am a client and a user of more than one company of the same conglomerate. And the idea now is to have an end-to-end vision of that customer. And the only way to do that is to really start to share data and to understand the daily life of our users with a more open view. So now it's a challenge. It's a huge challenge. Not only because security and regulatory policies of sharing data of our users, but also because of the legacy that every subsidiary has. So the technology that every subsidiary has there don't interoperate. So yeah, that's another revolution of digital transformation, I would say, that allow us to finally have interconnected journeys between subsidiaries.
Thank you, Mariela. We're going to put a closure here. As a closure, I want to say thank for the family for being always supportive and encouraging Mariela to get to this finish line. Without your support and your love, that wouldn't be possible at all. It's not a small feature of a PhD, is the community that is surrounded that. It always takes a village to get here. And I want also to thank Mariela for trusting the Institute of Design, coming here to do a corporate PhD on its early stage. You're the second one to graduate on the structure of the corporate PhD. So the work that you're doing is a role model for many others to come, and hope that many more will come. But thanks for trusting us. Thanks for working with us with all the ups and downs of a PhD program. 4 years is not a small time, a short time. So, but I strongly believe this is a novel result of the work that is possible when academic and industry cooperate for such an extended period of time, working with the most talented people out there. So congratulations and thanks for being with us, working with us, and carrying this entire process to the finish line. Thank you. Thank you all. And we close here. Thanks for everyone that participated online and for those who came here. Thank you.